Welcome to the BPM 360 podcast. I'm Russell.
And I'm Caspar. And together we will help you navigate the treacherous waters of the BPM adoption journey. I hope you enjoy the podcast. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the BPM 360 podcast. My name is Caspar, your host, and joined as always by my trusted co-host and friend Russell. How are you, my friend?
I'm fine. Thanks. Great to be here, and that we've managed to get together at this late time of the night, and we all, well, the two of us are traveling. So I think it's that's something different than meeting up on a Friday afternoon at home.
True. Where are you then?
Actually, I'm on my way to a BPM conference in Stuttgart. So,
Cool.
All about processes, 2 days of, actually also what I'm really looking forward to, some like process hackathon. So it didn't say too much details about it, but I'm really looking forward to say, what methods and approaches they will bring that into this like workshop character, and some very interesting talks and keynotes to look into. So yeah, I'm gonna have some nice 2 days, and I think I may be meeting up you as well there.
You will, yeah. I'm in Munich right now, but I'll be on my way to Stuttgart after tomorrow. So at tomorrow night actually. So I'll see you on Thursday in Stuttgart for that session. Looking very much forward to it. But we have a guest, Russell.
Yes, that's fantastic.
We do, and let me introduce him. Ladies and gentlemen, please meet Professor Dr. Engineer, and I'm probably forgetting a couple of titles, Hajo Reijers. Hajo, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Caspar. Hello, Russell.
Hi, Hajo.
It's an honor to have you on the show, Hajo, and we always like full transparency. So I already know Hajo for quite a while. I'm having the privilege of once in a while get into his classroom and bore his students to death with my stories about BPM.
On the contrary, our students love it.
Yeah, that's always very good to hear. And so we thought it would be good to just reverse the roles a little bit and have Hajo on our BPM 360 podcast. Hajo, could you introduce yourself a little bit to our listeners who some of you might not know you. I know it's a shame, but it happens. So just, and one thing that we're particularly interested in is, how did you get involved in the BPM field?
Yes. Okay. Yes. Let me tell you a little bit about then my background. So currently, I'm a professor at Utrecht University. I'm the head of a group there, and the group is called Process Science. The group consists of about 15 people. There are other professors, postdocs, PhD students, and all of them are, very similar to me. They are all enthusiasts about process, and some of them are, I would say, very techno-centered in the sense that they develop algorithms and techniques, tools, and others are more, I would say, have a more industrial engineering background, look at BPM from a management perspective, and that fits me perfectly, that there are people with both of these interests, because I sit in the middle somewhere between these two. Mm-hmm. I'm trained as an engineer. I'm a computer. I did my studies in Eindhoven. That is not a completely unknown name in the area of process management. I did my PhD. Did my PhD studies there. But maybe I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit, because when I finished my computer science studies, I had no idea I would end up in academia. On the contrary, I remember taking pictures on my last days at the university together with a good friend of me, like the lecture halls and the buildings. Like, I'm never going to return here again. This was a fantastic episode, but now I'm going to move to the real world. And I started as a programmer first, a computer science, a computer programmer, and then made a switch. And that switch, I think that had a big impact on my professional career. I started working for a management consultancy firm. At that time, it was called Anderson Consulting. Now we know it as Accenture. And there was more or less a coincidence that the the group I ended up with had already a process focus. So as a young consultant, I worked on the implementation of workflow management systems. So now perhaps more known as process management systems or process automation platforms. And I did that for a while. I enjoyed that work. I liked the perspective of organizations, looking at organizations through a process lens. I've really felt comfortable with, not only looking at the technology, but also the bigger picture of where the technology would operate. So it spoke to me. I liked the work, but there was something which I found out that was didn't fit me so well, that we often saw the same types of problems again and again, but we never had the time to look into deeper effects. For example, we found out that if we wanted to implement the processes where there was a lot of flexibility, that it was difficult to capture that well in a process model. But then, the project ran out of money, ran out of time, we had to deliver the product, and we had to move on. And after a while, I would say a couple of years, I started thinking, I'm actually interested in these more fundamental problems. And there was never time to work on those. So I started looking around. I asked if my manager at the time whether I perhaps could spend some time on a PhD project. I was thinking about that then. And then the headquarters in Chicago said that I could work for a day per week on a PhD project. I thought, well, then I'll finish it when I retire. So that's not a good route for me. And then something super remarkable happened, and this changed my professional career. There was a position open at Eindhoven University of Technology, exactly the university where I did my studies. There was a position there for a part-time PhD project, while at the same time working as a BPM consultant. And this was a fantastic position for me. And I had good luck that this was created by a professor who was working at the time, who was the director of Deloitte and also a part-time professor in Eindhoven. So I stepped into, I applied, I was hired, and then for years I worked for 50% of my time on my PhD project, and for the other 50% of my time I worked as a consultant. I
Cool.
more or less worked in both of these worlds. Then I did all kinds of super interesting mini projects, and often I was also able to apply them in the projects that I was working on for a consultancy company. At the time it was Buckinist. It was acquired later by Deloitte. But by Deloitte. And and then I finished after 5 years. And the question then was what to do next. And that was also the time in my life that I became a parent. And I knew what the life of a consultant was like. And I thought, well,
I understand
becoming
that.
a parent and not seeing my children for a while, that's not actually the path I see for me. Let's stay at the university for a couple of years. And that couple of years turned to be a rather long stretch, because since then I've always stayed at university, in the academic life. At one point I moved from Eindhoven to the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam, and around 6 years ago I moved to Utrecht. In between, I have done all kinds of other small jobs. I've always worked in practice as well, so I've also done jobs in R&D. I worked as a part-time consultant, but since that time, I'm mostly an academic. That is a bit the story of my professional life.
Wow, and just I mean, the world's a very small place, and you're actually, I think, the second person from your own faculty group that we have on the show, because we had Iris Berenpoot on the show already. Russell, you remember that because you really liked that interview.
That's true.
And then the other small thing is that one of the other people, Hajo, in your group, ran the department in which I graduated at Ernst & Young back in the day when I studied in Eindhoven as well. So the world is a really small place, and I think the process management
This,
field is an even smaller place.
yeah.
But
That's
it's
Nico Brandt, right?
Wow.
Yeah.
Nico
Yeah.
Brandt, yeah,
This is
exactly. And
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
we're
maybe
happy
that's
to have you.
because Holland is a small place, but that's another.
Yet, but this
That's true.
is where a lot of the innovation comes from. To be very honest.
No, it's true. It's a real hotspot.
Yeah. Well, yeah, but if it
It's
gets too hot, we
curious.
open
It's
up.
curious.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if it gets too hot, we simply open up the dikes a bit and we cool it off. That's no worries. All right.
But what I do think is interesting is the possibility you've had to combine, like this the work side and the academia side. I'm not quite sure in how far that path is so open in the German like setup. I think it's quite a struggle to get like a full professorship. And once you get in there, you get like sucked up by all the work you're doing, around the academia, the teaching, but also getting the money in and writing papers. So,
True.
so if you're saying that you've been always having let's say the even the chance of actually, let's say, not stepping out, but going into certain like jobs next to the
Yep.
academia. I think that's a very healthy setup, especially when you're talking about engineering and management topics.
Yeah.
Because then, I think because it's challenged, keeping touch
Yes.
with,
Yeah.
let's say the appliance of such things. I suppose every science has the same challenges, and it always depends on what kind of like links they have to industries to apply certain sciences. But especially in this field around process management, there's such a dynamic there in the involvement of, say, the ID technologies, but also then the management, say, disciplines around this, and it is. I just doing it pure theoretically is of little value, actually. Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's why I
Yeah.
think if you did that 10 years just pure academia, I think that's a challenge. Staying in touch with what is actually happening.
Well, I agree with
So
you.
maybe that's a special
BPM
setup.
BPM is an applied field, right? I see it as a very applied. I see it as a scientific discipline.
Yeah.
At least you can also see it as a professional discipline. But I'm working on BPM from an academic perspective, but it's an applied field. So the connection with practice is super important. I'm not saying that I'm as involved as I used to be as a practicing consultant. Those days are past. But I think it brought me it brought me a very practical perspective on BPM. And I think for the rest of my professional life, I will never run out of ideas or perhaps challenges that I have seen in practice. And I think a couple of them are very persistent, right? They won't just go away. So that it's a very fertile ground for research, but also for my teaching. It's rather easy to make the step from the theory to practical to practical situations.
Yeah.
So I get also a lot of questions about young students who consider working in academia, doing a PhD project, and when they hear my story, they often say, "Well, I like that part to mix these things." But the truth is, it's not very easy to combine these two things. So I will never say to anybody, well, it's going to be easy to switch all the time and to work a little bit. I mean, there's no guarantee that people can do the same things as I managed to do in my life. And I do think that the academic life should be more open, for example, to lend out people for a time to practice, right? So I'm a big fan
absolutely.
of my PhD students working for a while in a corporate setting, right? To have a bit of an idea of what is going on. I think that pays itself back in terms of inspiration or the relevance of the research that people do. And it's also a call for I would say for industry, right? Open your shop for an academic, share data so that we can work much more closely together. Yeah.
I see a similar analogy between if you're in the software vendor industry, it's the same analogy having worked on the customer side for a couple of years. And I have these conversations with students as well, and they want to go into consultancy, and I typically tell them you've better first work a couple of years in the industry to understand how things actually work in a company before you start to consult on it, because otherwise you're just doing a trick. And
I love that
I see
advice.
that difference. Yeah, I see that difference really well when I work with clients. I can honestly say I've been there, I've done that. This works. This typically doesn't. Let's talk about it. It's a different dynamic than just having another slide deck that you try to work your way through. So
it gives a much better appreciation also of what operational work is, what it means, the day-to-day problems you face, and that this is far from. Then I'll relate it to my field, the academic world, where things are often idealized, abstracted from the nitty-gritty, and I think it's good to have that in the back of your mind. How rough operations really are.
Yeah,
that's a good point, because I think that's where process management always has this like an abstraction of what is actually happening. So I see with some of our consultants, and even if they're in, if you go into some like white collar area, then it's also okay. It's procurement, and you still somehow it's like, let's say, pushing papers and objects, creating them in the system. But as soon as you get down to the logistics and you get down to manufacturing, then you look at maybe a process model or process documentation, and it really is just like such an abstract, condensed form of what is happening. And it's only if you go down into the factory and you go, oh my God. Yeah. So because you see like there's people pushing, things around, and there's things happening, there's things being maintained, there's things breaking down, there's something being spilled. I mean, not typically always, but you're on that level of actually looking at this craziness, and then going back, then you say, so this is like a very highly abstract, idealized form of how things should work to have an ideal flow, a just-in-time delivery, of material and information. And then, but you having that picture, as you were saying, in the back of what operations really is, all the nitty-gritties and the dirties and the workarounds, like Iris is looking at.
The workarounds. I was waiting for that term.
Taking that into account.
It's but Russell, I think if you want to do generalization, which I think is needed to scale something, you can't do that without the mirror of reality. And I have that conversation with my internal colleagues that are very specialized in the process mining field, and we talk very often about what is the added value of process documentation. And I tell them, you should simply go. You have a customer, Novartis. You have a customer, Shell. You have a customer, BMW. Go for a day or two into the factory and walk with them. And within a couple of hours, you'll realize why it's important to write things down and align on them with the rest of the people. And it's more than just things that live in systems. It's you're typically talking about people. And certainly in manufacturing environments, you're talking about safety, health, and environment, which really is being driven by the fact that you are capable of aligning on this is how we do it, and you write the bloody thing down. And how you write it down, that can be different things, but it ends up in a process for sure.
Yeah. But anyway, just Caspar, before we move on, Hajo, so if you said at the beginning, you're coming more from the engineering, computer-like side, but you're also very interested in like the management aspects of process management. So, but what Iris was quite cool because she really talked in depth about her topic, and I really have like this picture of her of what the field is she is, like, let's say, specialized on or she's deep into. So, but could you just give us like a couple of, let's say, buzzwords to say which ballpark do we put you? So Will was kind of like Mr. Process Management, and Iris was Mrs. Workaround. I don't want to oversimplify it. And if you say, guys, I've got it, I'm higher, I do everything. I can shoot with left and right, and I can do defender, I can do attacker. You're the man of all trades in process management. That's also cool, but just give us a bit of a shot on which playing field are you in on the terms
Yeah,
of process management?
yeah, yeah. So it is true that I never committed to to a substream exclusively within BPM.
Okay.
I've always had
Okay.
had an interest in many different topics. So there are researchers who have a much clearer profile than I have, and I think it's a bit of, it shows my character that I'm simply very curious, and I like to work on many different things. But if you want to pinpoint me to a certain stream within research where I did
Mm-hmm.
quite some work there, and I also think that my work had some impact there, is process innovation. So
Okay.
changing processes for the better, generating new ideas, redesigning those processes, and clearly also then affecting performance or conformance of these processes. So, and it's a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
funny story that one of the academic articles that I contributed to, and that has collected the biggest number of citations from all my articles, is a paper that deals with the so-called redesign heuristics. So when I was a PhD student, and I told you already, I had seen a couple of process automation projects at that time. Re-engineering was big at that time. So I had seen already a number of projects where people tried to change processes. And I could
Mm-hmm.
already see that there were some patterns behind it. People tried out certain smart ideas. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't work. And I saw that these patterns were recurring. And I started thinking, well, it's probably worthwhile to write those patterns down so that if anybody else wants to start redesigning processes again, they have a sort of a list to start with. Just ideas that worked in the past that you can apply
Mm-hmm.
in your current situation. I made a sort of an overview of these things. I tried to categorize it, but honestly, I did that in I wouldn't say in a very rigorous manner. It was simply, those were the patterns I had seen at my time and I read about. So I put them on a list, and I remember my PhD supervisor, Wil van der Aalst, also not an
We
unknown
know
Oh yeah,
him.
person
the
in the field.
We know him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I had a discussion with him. I said, well, do you think that I should publish this? Should I include it in my thesis? Because it's completely different from all the other things I've done. At that time, I was working on simulation. I was also working on performance analysis, battery net analysis, so all kinds of more formal and technical stuff. And he thought, well, I think it's mildly interesting. Why not include it in your thesis? And I had no idea that it would be
mildly
become
interesting.
such a popular article. And I think that many people who worked on the topic of improving processes and redesigning processes often go back to that article and try to, for example, to enhance the list, come up with more patterns, which is great. So I've supervised a PhD student at the time, Rob van Wersch, who's now working in the academic hospital in Maastricht, who extended that list with practices which are often found in the healthcare domain. So that's one stream.
Oh, that's
I also
cool.
know about
Yeah.
a research group in Germany who tried to automate the application of these patterns to not make this a human exercise, but to use an intelligent system to find in existing processes opportunities to apply these patterns. So redesign has been sort of a main thread in my work, and also worked on different methodologies. But I would say that's one of the things that I worked on most. And currently, I'm interested in process mining, robotic process automation, and more I see the link between process management and what I would call the future of work. How work is changing because of the advent of digital technologies, of AI, and I see there's a close relation also between process thinking and thinking about how work of all of us is affected in some way. So, and that is perhaps a little less of a technical problem or technical issue, but much more of a societal angle.
Yeah, cool. The article you mentioned, Hajo, is that a publicly available article? And if yes, would you be able to share a link? Then we'll include it into the show notes, of course.
There is a public version of that. It's so-called. It's a personal copy that you submit to a journal, and I can find that and provide you with a link. Yeah.
All right.
And it's a yeah. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, that would be really cool. And Russell, just for your information, I very often quote a book called The Fundamentals of Business Process Management. And Hajo is really a modest person that I know already for a long time, but he's one of the co-authors of that, together with Marlon Dumas, that you probably also know. So he's at the bedrock foundation of BPM as well. So having established
that's also an interesting. It's also an interesting story. This fundamentals of
go
BPM.
Ahead. We got time.
BPM. Yeah, it's an interesting story because nowadays academics are not so much encouraged. Let me put it this way. To put much energy in teaching and writing educational material, but at that time, when we thought of this project, it was simply the situation that many people in the BPM field were teaching on the basis of articles, notes, and there was no integrated view on all the things that existed at that time and were more or less considered as the fundamentals. So this project started independently. On the one hand, we had Marlon Dumas and Marcello La Rosa working on a book. And on the other hand, Jan Mentling and I were also starting a book. And we found out that these two teams were both writing a book, and then we joined forces. But mostly the purpose was for our own teaching. And we could not predict in any way that when we wrote that book, how popular it would become. Also academically, I think it has been cited for more than 5,000 times in different articles and other books. It is now used in close to 100 universities all over the world to teach on BPM. And very often when people indeed hear my name and they have to connect it to something, they often go to the teaching part. And I actually like it. We did that at a time where it was not, and it's certainly still not popular, that academics spend so much time on education and on teaching. But I think it was one of the best decisions I made in my professional life to spend time on that.
And I still use the definition that you have in that book of what BPM is. I have that virtually every time on slide number 2 or 3 when I need to enable people on what does that mean, because it's such an eloquent definition that encompasses so many different things. Because what we very often see in the software world is that companies focus on one of these things and think that this is it, this is the shit, and then they start to then expand, and then all of a sudden they say, wow, now we can model, mine, we can orchestrate, we can automate, and then I simply say to them, well, now you actually achieved the status of a BPM platform. This is all BPM. It's not just one of the things. What I would like to get into before we run out of time, and we didn't get to the topic that I really would like to have you on here. But I know, I mean, time flies when you're having fun. So every year, Hajo, there is a international conference for business process management, and this year it took place about 3 weeks ago in Seville, in Spain. Unfortunately, I had to bail out on the last minute, and I had to go somewhere else. But can you talk us through a little bit on where is BPM going? Because you typically share the cutting edge research in that conference. What are the things that we need to look out for that's going to be hitting us in 1, 3, 5, 10 years from now?
Yeah, well,
it's a vague question, a broad one, but I'm sure you can handle that.
No, it's a clear question, and the reason I need to take a step back a little bit is to give you a bit of an idea of how big and how rich the conference is. So probably when you ask somebody else who attended the same conference, they have seen other things than I did. So to give you a bit of an idea, the
Okay.
conference is, so for me it's the event of the year, right? So
Yeah.
what for Caspar probably Carnival is once a year, right? For me it's BPM,
absolutely
right?
not.
No.
I'll set the record.
Okay.
I'll set the record straight afterwards. But you go first, Hajo.
Okay. Well, so this is the thing that I'm looking forward every year, and it's an event that, well, depending on how you count it, it's a full week event. It's a full week event, and
Yeah.
around 300 to 400 people gather at one place. But the impressive thing, and that's also a bit the overwhelming thing, is that at any time there are 4 or more things happening at the same time. Right? There are 4 tracks, activities. So there are academic papers being presented. There are tutorials where people give a lesson on a topic. There are meetings for young researchers where they are able to ask advice on their PhD project. There are specialized forums for certain themes. So there was much happening at the same time. So when you go there, you can only be there at one of these streams at the same time. So that's a bit of a disclaimer, but then you also have an idea of why it's only a slice of the things I can
I know.
tell
I
you
was
about.
there last year in Krakow.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what then are the things that I saw? Maybe start with our keynotes. We had 3 keynote speakers, and we typically talk about. We have an internal perspective. Somebody from our community gives a presentation. We often ask somebody else from another scientific discipline. But the keynote that I wanted to highlight, and I found it interesting because it tells me something about how BPM is developing. We had as a keynote speaker Josep Carmona, a professor from Barcelona, who started his own company a couple of years ago, Process Talk. At first, he was interested in technology that would allow people to interact with process models through natural language. And this company of his has evolved over the years. And the focus of his talk was to tell the community, and especially the younger members of the community, how close many of our ideas are to successful application and also successful businesses. And I found it interesting that we see in the BPM field that there are many good ideas that potentially can be developed into services, into offerings, and even commercial offerings. And I noticed there was a lot of energy in the room, and people got really excited. And now I think it is a sort of a development that we as academics also see the value of developing in that direction. And Russell, you mentioned earlier typical academic career, right? Which is the ladder of becoming a full professor, writing papers and even more papers and grants. And I saw that there was a sort of an opening of this direction. And I find it a sign of how BPM and practice are getting closer in a sense. So I like that. And what I expect for the next couple of years is that many young PhD students are going to be influenced by this talk and say, well, perhaps I don't want to become a professor, perhaps I don't want to work as a consultant, but I want to start my own company. And I think maybe, Caspar, you can see something similar. I can see that it is a very vibrant area, the area of BPM startups. So I really like that aspect.
Yeah, and maybe that ties into the what you were saying about that research on redesigning and optimizing processes and finding patterns. I think maybe the gap between, let's say, some theories you have and then the applicability was quite far away. And with digital capabilities and especially large language models now, they're growing together. So taking, like, let's say, a digital machine, and feeding it with your patterns on optimizing processes, maybe now you could get to the level where you're saying that one company was trying to now apply these patterns to automatically, let's say, identify potential optimization, and in processes. This something I think is just, it's so near to being really practical, and you can now in much quicker time, because even the coding you could do faster, for applications,
Exactly.
you could pilot them
Yeah.
faster, but you can also apply some of these, let's say, model abstract, let's say, process talk. Just think about it. You could talk about a
Yeah.
process now, and you can create a model.
Yeah.
And where before you to formalize this, the steps of
Yes.
dissecting the language and the sentences into activities and roles and whatever would have been thousands of lines of code. Now maybe it's
Exactly.
only one
Yeah.
system prompt. So this
Yeah.
divergence in the capabilities of technology coming more and more, like say, being able to simulate human thinking and logics is opening up a vast field. And I think that is reflected in what you're saying about the conference as well. Yeah, so vast
I
potentials
completely
being
agree.
there that can work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I completely agree. The realization of some ideas that maybe were quite abstract a couple of years ago, the realization into working code, into the use of off-the-shelf technology, and which is very accessible to do all kinds of things. The step from bringing research ideas and research prototypes into practice has become much smaller.
I'll give you an example of that, actually, very close to my heart. So my son started University of Eindhoven this year, so he just enrolled in physics study. But last year, in his graduation year at the gymnasium, he needed to do a research project, and he decided to look into if he could use quantum field theory to enhance the pictures that come out of a PET scan. I told you about that, Russell, earlier, but I think it's a good example. So he looked into the theory of what quantum field mechanics and quantum field theory is. He looked at how a PET scan works, which works on photons. And then he started looking at the open source software that hospitals use called MIFTY-PET. And then he just created an add-on with the help of AI and with the help of testing. He created an add-on to that with about roughly between, I think, 100 and 1,000 lines of code. And he ran through an entire library of academic educational PET scan pictures. And he was actually capable of sharpening them and making them less blocky and less Roblox kind of pictures, because that's what PET scan typically are. The granularity is much smaller. It took him literally like 4 months just to get from an idea to something that he put into practice. And that's, I think, is an example of what you're talking about, Hajo, and you as well, Russell. The younger generation are much more, they're much more digitally native. And that accelerates and reduces the time. The time to market is just almost gone.
Yes.
You can't sleep anymore, or somebody else did it.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. Okay, so that's an interesting one.
So that's more about, I would say, the connection between the fields, but there were also, I would say more topics that you could really see that attracted a lot of attention from research, and there were a lot of presentations about. So I think what is unavoidable is the rise of large language models. And the community, the BPM community, is not per se the community that is the driving force behind these models themselves. But I found it ingenious how different teams used these models and incorporated them in more, I would say, complex pipelines to take care of part of reasoning and part of checking, to do useful things in the BPM sphere.
Okay.
So to give you an example, I saw the use of large language models, for example, and it's something that I think that you would find interesting, Caspar, to check the quality of process documentation to identify ambiguities in process
Okay.
documentation.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that is
So
interesting.
instead of using experts to go through these fields, to have large language models to use them to spot these things and then improve upon them. I found it a very smart way of thinking of a quality of process documentation. But you can see that the LLM is not it's a sort of an element in a
Yeah.
bigger approach. There was a fantastic presentation during one of the workshops by Peter Pruga from Slovenia. And what he did is he signaled the rise of LLM based agents, autonomous agents based on large language models as their core. And he started comparing their performance in terms of how good they would be to automate processes. And he compared them with traditional RPA technology. And one of the comparisons, one of the things that he found out about are the strengths and the weaknesses of using these different types of technologies. So one of the things he saw is that the development to come up to automate a part of a process with using an LLM-based agent is phenomenal. It's so quick that you have something that is working. It's not very stable always compared when you do it in the more old-fashioned way, to do it with an RPA tool. But it's much quicker. But when you look in the long term, it's much pricier to use that if you want to use it for very repetitive executions of processes.
Yeah.
Using an RPA tool would actually be more economic to do that thing. So then you see, again, it's not the development of the language model itself, but the use of it in a sort of process context and the evaluation of that. I think that's a big theme in our field, and I think what we will understand better and better the strengths and the weaknesses of using this kind of technology for all kinds of process-oriented tasks.
Yeah, and I think that goes hand in hand with the discussion about agents now, that they can be very specialized in their task, or they're fine-tuned to do a certain task, and then they get combined with each other. So an agent actually then requests another agent to support him. And I also just read an article where they were also talking about how you actually can simulate more the way you think and you go about things. So you so if you're doing research, you start collecting ideas, then you start then setting up theories, and then you start validating certain kind of like different scenarios, and then you come to certain conclusions. Now, to build just say one LLM assistant that will do all of that, that's not going to work. So what you're doing is you're starting to dissect actually your approach on getting to a solution, and for each of these, let's say, steps, you're then thinking about, is it a digital like solution, which where you have a binary way of heuristic decision taking, or some code, or is it something where you have to be more, I say, fuzzy, like in the old, like fuzzy, and where you can use LLM? Do you have structured data? Do you have unstructured data? And so I think, and as Caspar, as you were saying, because they're now so applicable, you have them in your hands, and you could string them together, which would have normally been a huge invest to see if it works, can now be piloted within a couple of weeks, ultimately, and then each of these little steps can be fine-tuned, and you come to some fantastic results. And that's what I think the trend is, combining, in a smart way, all these different, let's say, nuggets that you have, and then actually thinking more analytically about what are the steps of how I go about a validation of or a consistency check of processes, or even coming up with new ideas, innovation ideas, where you dissect the approach to get to innovations and take then each step and look at the best solution for each of these steps.
But then this is an interesting one, because I think let me see if I can combine two things that I heard both you, Hajo, and Russell say tonight. Because the hypothesis that I have is that it also works the other way around. So Hajo, you said the LLMs and how they work with BPM. I think BPM, so your process repository, is the ultimate training set for an LLM if you want to use it to help people understand how to do their job. So imagine if you have an AI engine, if you don't give it guardrails, it will hallucinate at some point in time. So the guardrails, I'm convinced, is basically, this is our business context, which is most eloquently, I would say, documented in the form of your processes connected to roles and applications and risks and standards and all the things that you can imagine. So at the moment that you say, I have a process repository, well, let's call it process intelligence, whatever you want to call that. So the combination of mining and process documentation, I'm using that to train an LLM. I can then feed in the improvement heuristics that you mentioned earlier, Hajo, and set the AI loose on everything that I have and say, start optimizing, go nuts, and tell me what you find. There will always be a human gatekeeping role. You need to validate everything AI does, but it certainly opens up the gate to making process continuous improvement much more effective. Now, prove me wrong, please.
No, but it's not prove you wrong. But I think what I think is you're coming to the level where you say this like this repository that you're talking about. It's used to be like a very primitive collection. I say primitive collection of models, and objects and diagrams that are somehow stringing them together. I think with the capabilities now, being able to reach out and analyze and interpret unstructured data and documents like SOPs, the repository is far more expanding than the old, let's say, enclosed, let's say, process model repository database. So that's something that dynamic is really exciting. But what I also think is it's like an organism that that needs it. You're harvesting it, but you're also having to nurture it and feed it and maintain it. And so what I do see is that that the views and the way people were, let's say, putting say information in, and a lot of the tools were being created, they were very focused on helping the people, let's say, maintaining the data. But then, on the other hand, say how to extract information or use it to optimize your processes. There are all these different like use cases, and I think here there is a shift in, because there always used to be a big discrepancy of how do I model process for automating my process, like the BPMN in a style that I can do a workflow. How do I model it to do an SAP project? How do I do it and model it to do a compliance check? I think that's merging more and more together, because also here digitally you can have like a more generalized model, which can be super rich, but due to the technologies, you can extract the relevant elements from you dynamically to do a compliance check, to do an optimization, to do an automation. And that's something where I see a big development, say that this repository is becoming super complex, but manageable because of the technology we have nowadays. So it's not like we have to have 5 databases. One has the file structure for all the SOPs so he can do his compliance topic. The other one does a process model so he can do his automation with a workflow engine. And the third one does, we can bring them all together into one repository and still manage it and still use it for different use cases. I think that's something that is also possible nowadays due to this, this combination of different techniques in the context of these repositories. So the value of having one common book of knowledge, the repository, I think it's getting bigger and bigger, and there's less reasons not to merge them together into one world.
I want to
what's your take on that?
Well, I subscribe to that. I think this one. I like also the phrase that you use. This book, this integrated book, becomes available, becomes accessible, and will grow. But I would say the reservation I have, and I see this also in the projects that we do, is that we are extremely dependent on the quality of data. And I noticed that that there is a risk in how Caspar also mentioned, of course, the safekeeping that we have to do, that the human oversight that we still need. It is considering the quality of data in many corporate settings, there's also a big risk in automatically trying to infer and use this data without understanding the particular context or purpose for which the data is generated. And I see that as a sort of a risk when we're talking about this autonomous, automated, incorporating loop of something that is becoming, I would say, perhaps fed with the wrong assumptions on what the data that we see and the models, how they are created, where they're coming from. And that is my reluctance to see it as a sort of a purely positive thing, because I see that we need to ensure the quality of the things that this book is composed of.
Absolutely. But if you look at then the real life, let's say, of the organization, the checks and balances by having auditors and compliance managers and then that are, I'll say, like a counterpart to the people and the managers saying we have to have everything lean, and the quality managers that say it's not so much about compliance for the, let's say fraud, like elements, new risk you have there, but it's more say, how do I sustain the quality of the product in the manufacturing? How do I, how do I enhance my customers, services? So there's always these conflicts in a real organization where you have different, let's say, gatekeepers trying to, let's say, keep their stake in their view upright. And there's always this conflict, there's always this battle there. So sometimes the mandate is stronger, or we have to save money, and everybody's going, well, that's going to end in a disaster. And sometimes it does end in disasters like whatever Shell, having, ruining the environment. So I think reality is, if chaos prevails, then bad things can happen. We need checks and balances in our organizations in real time as well. The thing is, how can we overcome let's say, the hidden agendas that are just happening in reality? So you have like an auditor coming in, and he just sees the top level, and underneath everything is just, let's say, rubbish. And they say, oh, we survived it this time, we get out. So ultimately, I think for organizations in the dynamics they are there, and maybe also the scrutiny that they are under, to be compliant and have, being able to adapt to sustainability rules much faster. Maybe it's a necessity to also have the model of the company in like merging and overcome these hidden agendas and the separate modeling and the separate documentation. So because the risk is real in real time, and what we're doing in the repository is just a model. And here I think there is a clear interference between the gatekeepers looking at it from a compliance perspective, from a quality perspective, from a financial perspective, from an operational perspective, and the more we have these interlinked and transparent, the more we should be capable to get it under control. But ultimately, shit in, shit out. If we have a model that is incomplete and is being manipulated and is being fraudulent, we're gonna optimize the wrong process. We're gonna conclude the wrong things. I'm completely with you. That it will always be an issue.
So just we need to start thinking about wrapping this up, Russell, because time flies as usual. We're already coming up to the hour actually, and we need to think about the attention span of our listeners. Not that I want to insult anybody. One last question, Hajo, for you. If there is one topic or one paper or one person for you that stood out on that conference that we should all follow or listen to or read about, who would that be? Who do you want to put into the spotlight in using our very modest platform of the podcast? But
I can single out a single person, and that's not an unbiased selection. It's a PhD.
We don't care. You're our guest, so you can be biased.
It's a PhD candidate. It's a PhD candidate in my own group, Wouter van
go
der
ahead.
Waal.
Yeah. Okay.
And Wouter has picked up on work that Iris Berenpoot started on workarounds, and he did a fantastic step, I think, from the work that Iris has done on identifying workarounds and conceptualizing them, and also seeing the role of those workarounds in real life organizations. And he made a step to automatically detecting workarounds in data. He has a fantastic cooperation with the academic hospital in Utrecht. And one of he presented a paper during one of the workshops attached to the conference, where he studied only one of the workarounds that he identified automatically, and he checked how the different professionals in this medical process, how they have entirely different attachment to the workaround. So you will see that doctors work around the system in a different way than the nurses, and the secretaries find even other ways to work around the systems. And I think that this is a sort of a wake-up call, that if he has done this in-depth study of one of the workarounds that he found in the organization, but when you see the complexity and how different the real world is from often our abstract world that we put in rules and in normative models and pathways, clinical pathways, and you see the real world, I think this is sort of a wake-up call for all of us, that to appreciate the difference between this normative and the real world, but also, and I think that's the positive takeaway from it, how good we are getting as a community to find out about this, so that you can actually make a step towards either improving the process or consolidating what is happening, or perhaps improving the system. And I think this is where so much real value is going to be added through the contributions of our field to practice. And I clearly see this happening in a couple of years, that it will be possible for professionals in the medical field and other fields, that they are going to use their own tools to find out about how the processes in reality develop compared to what we have written down, how they should be, and perhaps start improving their own processes. So I see that as so. The paper is called Resource-Oriented Workaround Analysis, a case study. He presented it at the workshop, but I can provide a link to us.
Yes, please.
That would be great.
Accessible file.
And
we're gonna put Wouter in the
really,
spotlight.
yeah, that really, I think that wraps it up as well, because we've been talking so much about, say, the abstract layer of process management versus the reality, and especially around the workarounds. And when you're taking process mining, you're seeing the data, and you get to a certain level, you say, something's not working there. But for the real root cause, you're going to have to go down into the dungeons and ask, why the hell did this not work? And or why did it work even? Because the data doesn't currently cover exactly all the steps where the workarounds are happening. And here, in being able to identify them, as you said, like with patterns, to say, when can I maybe from a process mining deduct, here workarounds are in place. We need to have a more, because you have a certain variance in certain metrics here that from which you can conclude, this is a workaround area. And on the other hand, then I think this is exactly the area where also not the RPA can help you overcome the workarounds, but more the, let's say, fuzzy approaches with large language, with assistants, can help you say, for the secretary, she needs a different support in doing things, let's say, better, in whatever better is actually defined as, versus the doctor versus the nurse, because they have different skills and they need different support. And here a
different authority levels.
Exactly. And here you will need a more flexible approach to whoever is involved in this step of the process, to actually then get to the result faster with a better quality. And this is a huge area of black spots that a lot of the abstract happy flow models and the process mining data kind of like deficiency, because it's a manual workaround, is currently blind. So absolutely, that's a fantastic outlook for things to come.
So Russell, let's contemplate on the fact if we want to do a follow-on on the Iris podcast. We're going to get Wouter on the podcast and let him talk about it. I know that this is a topic that really interests you.
He can tell you stories about the things he found out with his analysis, which will boggle your mind.
Oh, very well, very well.
Yeah,
sounds
cool.
Good.
I do need to wrap it up now, folks. It's been a pleasure, Hajo, to have you on the podcast. So first of all, thank you very much for making the time in your evening to sit down and talk to Humpty and Dumpty on our side of the podcast crew, or Statler and Waldorf, as I like to call us sometime. So we really enjoyed this. And to our listeners, we're basically going to say thank you very much for listening and talk to you next time. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Hajo. It was a great pleasure. It was an honor.
Thank you for having me.
All right. Don't go anywhere, Hajo.